Pembina's Director of Federal Policy and a wonderful colleague. She is going to be speaking with Taylor Kuykendall. And Taylor is a reporter with S&P Global Market Intelligence, and the two of them are going to be talking about coal. So where's coal going? And what I will say is they're coming up. Come on up. If you're going to enjoy the conversation today, if you want a second pass at it, I'm going to plug another podcast called the Energy Transition Show, because you can listen, and we have the host of the Energy Transition Show here as well, a guy named Chris Nelder, who is on the utility scale breakout session. Chris, so right there, yeah. You can hear Chris interviewing Taylor talking about coal again if you want a second pass at it. And in fact, we have someone else from the Energy Transition Show that Chris interviewed, Eric Gimon, talking about grid integration. Both of them are going to be on the utility scale renewables panel at the breakout sessions. So that's a little preview. But let's pass it over to Erin and to Taylor and talk to us about coal.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. For those of you looking to take over the social media scene, let's call it Brangelina instead of Brad and Angelina. I think if we want to be relevant on social media, we have to use the millennial terms. All right, so this afternoon we are going to go through a quick discussion on international trends as it relates to coal-fired power. Just post-lunch, I'll bring it back to a little bit of the context of why we think this is an interesting topic for us to be discussing here at the summit today. And as other participants in the forum today have said, it's really all about the Paris Agreement, and that's really the driving force behind why we want to examine decarbonization trends in the electricity sector, both at home and abroad today. So as other folks have said today, the Paris Agreement aims to limit global temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius and encourages all countries to pursue efforts to limit that temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. And through its recognition of the common but differentiated responsibility principle, the Paris Agreement also acknowledges historical differences in contributions to global environmental problems. And therefore, current day realities for developed countries like ours to scale ambitious and transformative climate policies across their economies. But when you strip away the UN speak, what the Paris Agreement really calls for is total cuts to carbon pollution in the next 35 years. And for Canada, what this means is transition away from polluting sources of energy like oil, gas, and coal, and towards low carbon solutions for transportation, the built environment, and industrial processes. So of course, there's still many details to be worked out around just how we'll go about doing that. But one thing is for sure, the conversation is not if the world will transition away from fossil fuels, rather it's how and how quickly. And so for Canada, this conversation comes at a time when the machinery of our national and subnational governments are speaking to each other once again, and perhaps unlike before, working together to build a coherent policy framework for Canada to ensure that we, at a minimum, meet that 2030 international climate obligation. So governments, including Indigenous governments and civil society organizations, and of course the private sector, are fervently focused on domestic climate policy, and more specifically how to translate those big, lofty international ambitions into policy action here at home. So we think part of what that will entail for Canada is an accelerated phase-out of coal-fired power. So that brings us to our session here this afternoon. Many experts, including I think many of those who are in the room today, have concluded that in order to decarbonize the economy, we need to promote fuel switching and to use more clean electricity to power our daily activities and our lives. But what does that mean for electricity supply in North America, and more broadly, what does that mean for the world? And so on that score, we're lucky to have Taylor with us here today to work through some of those big questions. So Taylor Kuykendall is a coal reporter with S&P Global Market Intelligence. Taylor spends his 9 to 5, or maybe 9 to 6 or 9 to 7, reporting on issues affecting the US coal industry, including government policies, financial markets, land use development strategies, and many other issues. And he joins us today from Charlottesville, Virginia. Hey, Taylor.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Very exciting.
So to kick our fireside chat off, so of course I can't help but notice you're a West Virginian, and so coal culture must be in your blood. I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about the context in the US as it relates to coal-fired power. How would you characterize this current state of coal-fired power, and in particular, what trends have you observed in the last decade?
Right, I mean, simply put, being in the coal industry right now is frankly terrible if you're trying to make any money, especially in the US. One thing I want to start with that's kind of really underreported and not mentioned a lot to explain this is kind of how we got here, and that's when you hear a lot of news about the coal industry right now, of course, coal-fired generation is declining very significantly, but you're also hearing about a lot of financial stress in these companies. A lot of that has nothing to do with what's going on with regulation or what we're trying to do to address climate change. A lot of their problems is late 2011, they basically made multi-billion-dollar bets on the metallurgical coal market. They thought China was going to continue to produce steel and grow forever. Those bets turned out to be wildly off, and they were unable to service their debt. That said, there's a lot of factors, and we're going to get into those a little bit later, about why coal is kind of in the situation it is now. And I think in the same way that there's no really silver bullet to explain why coal went down, there's also none to explain how you would be able to revive it in any way. But the main problem for coal right now and coal generation, the future is highly uncertain. Much of the industry is bankrupt, and the public opinion is largely against coal. The problem with all three of those factors is whenever somebody has a chance to build a new source for power, and this applies everywhere, but particularly in the US right now, no one's building a new coal plant. We're talking about finding new sources of electricity. We're also talking about just shuttering the plants that we have now. So you can't get people that on Wall Street or anywhere else to kind of sink this capital investment in. And just to kind of go really quickly, I think some of these things show a little bit the scale of the problem. This is the market values of some of the publicly traded coal companies in the United States since I believe like 2011. Obviously, it's clear you didn't want to be an investor in coal. Didn't pay off. The market punched them pretty harshly. The only thing you see there that has any kind of anomaly is the little blue line. It's Consol Energy, and they're switching to natural gas, so that's how they survived. But just a couple of things. This is an example of how large the scale is. In the United States, about 45% or 45.6% of the coal that is going to the coal-fired electricity sector came from a coal company that's been in bankruptcy, is in bankruptcy or filed since 2012. So nearly half of the coal that we are burning, even though it's only now about a third of the power that we produce, is coming from companies that are bankrupt. This is one mine there in the center in Wyoming. You can see that's Arch Coal. That mine was largely economical. You can just kind of want to show you how widespread one coal mine can go. Another one you can look at when we look out into the future, 2025. Only about 6 states are going to be dominated by coal. These are based on our projections. Also, coal retirements. Every single dot there is a coal plant that someone plans to close between 2012 and 2021. Some are gone. Some will be gone soon. And then also just wanted to kind of make sure this is an issue that we touch on. And some people are sensitive about that access not starting at zero, so I like to point it out so that nobody thinks we're trying to manipulate anything, just like to see the trend. But coal jobs have been just absolutely decimated as a result. And I think that's something that we kind of miss sometimes, that should be a part of the conversation. There's whole regions where people don't have a job anymore. But that said, what's even kind of making this even worse, this is the Department of Energy's in the US coal tech funding versus for carbon capture, things like that, versus what they're putting in renewables. I think all the things I mentioned before, plus this, is a really, really strong symbol or signal from the market that coal generation is not going to be going up anytime soon in the United States.
Great. So you've walked us through a couple of really interesting graphics there. I wonder if you might be able to give us some insight around what's driving these trends. So is it primarily commodity prices? Is it economics, policies? We talked about the Paris Agreement. What's driving this, or is this a multitude of factors?
Well, the fun thing about writing about coal all the time is I get to mention all of these and we're still right at the bottom. So natural gas prices, that's the main driver. And I think that we really have to emphasize that because all the other factors, regulations, protests that have been able to shut, either, when I say protests, I mean things that have happened at the legal level in corporates and everywhere else, all of those are kind of enabled by the fact that because natural gas prices are so low in the United States, you can kick coal out and not have to worry about the cost of electricity being affected that much. That was the problem with coal forever. Told everybody that, you know, if you stop burning coal, if we don't build new coal power plants, your electricity prices are going to skyrocket. And in most places in the U.S., I don't think that's been the case, and that's largely because we found a way to unlock cheap shale gas. So that's a real big driver. But also, as that's kind of played out, the United States has started putting in rules that are going to make it even harder for coal to ever compete. So now, as we're starting to finally see natural gas prices rise after a really long low point, the coal companies aren't competing because they now have some new regulations to deal with. Utilities are kind of looking at that cost and thinking, you know, I'm not too concerned about maybe a little extra cost when the next president might come in and make an even stricter climate regulation. So. All these things are playing into it, and then you've got public sentiment that's largely against coal, so it's hard to find much support unless you're in one of the regions that mine coal and can directly economically benefit from that.
Great. I think by telling us that you think the next president might bring in stricter environmental policies, you may have just told us how you're going to vote.
Not at all.
Okay, so we've got a bit of insight into the current trends. What about the medium term? I mean, if you're seeing fluctuations in gas prices, what does the medium-term future look like for U.S. coal?
Right, in the past 2-3 years, probably the saddest place you could be was a coal industry conference. I have to go to a lot of them. But we're actually starting to see some optimism now. It's kind of weird, and I think they're somewhat realistic about it. Natural gas prices are starting to come up, and particularly in the U.S., we had a very, very mild winter. And then before that we had a summer that wasn't too bad either. But basically we weren't using power. And what happened is our coal stockpiles built up, nobody was burning it, so all of a sudden nobody wants to pay anything for coal. Prices were really depressed. The past, quarter, 2 quarters, we've seen a rise a little bit. And I think a lot of people are predicting, and it's hard to project these similar things, but a lot of people are thinking back into the back half of 2017, there might even be a bump in coal production and coal consumption in the United States. Not a lot, it's not going to go back to where it was. But I think there are seeing some opportunities, and that's mostly weather-driven, not really a change in the utilities' desire to burn more coal or regulations being loosened up. It's really just a factor of where we need more power. Coal comes up a little bit, but largely natural gas is the place a lot of those places.
Great.
Okay. I do actually have a medium-term forecast. You can see that this is mostly coal, and then largely flattens off through 2017. But for more long-term and medium-term, as you can see here, that's largely a function of the Clean Power Plan. The first bar here is 2015, and then we have a reference case and a no Clean Power Plan case. As you can tell, as we start to move down that line, the Clean Power Plan really drives coal even further. So out to 2040, coal's still burned. And again, these don't factor in any kind of disruptions in the market or things that we don't know about. But with the Clean Power Plan, we're probably going to be burning a lot less coal pretty soon.
All right, so shifting gear just a little bit. So we've heard from a number of different experts and speakers here today. A theme that's come up a few times is that climate policy can be politically fraught in Canada, and as a result, sometimes mitigation policies like accelerated coal phase-outs are characterized as drastic or scary, despite, in some cases, good evidence to the contrary. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the coal landscape more globally in order to situate the policy discussion here at home. Are Canada and the US alone in this? What trends are you observing in other OECD countries?
Right, so I think when you look globally, some of the main players in this, Denmark, France, UK, they're all working on a coal phase out. The only countries, I believe, according to the IEA, that have done the opposite of that is you have, I think, Russia, and I believe we also have, one other country, but Russia and Australia, and a lot of that's exports. But then the non-OECD countries is really kind of where the challenge is. Places like China and India, that's a huge electrification problem, and I think that's where we're going to start seeing kind of the future of coal. If you look into kind of the future, when you look out, coal's largely leveled off. A lot of people, you can look at this graph looking at the future for the EIA, and it looks like, it doesn't look so great because we're still seeing coal usage rise in non-OECD and also OECD OECD countries. But I think what's important to look at this graph is the very sharp the deceleration in coal growth, which is kind of the trend that's going forward. And this again, the EIA, which is kind of unfortunately bad at predicting anything that could happen other than the clean power plan, what we know now. Technology innovation happens all the time. This is kind of the ceiling for coal. This is not it's almost not its best case. This is, or sorry, it is its best case. This is not like the worst case scenario for coal. So I think when they look at this, it's really hard to kind of justify new investments really in any country, especially OECD countries. Almost all of them went off coal. I believe it's been falling in OECD countries since 2007. Really no signs of that reversing anytime soon.
And so when we think about policy commitments here in Alberta and perhaps a national commitment around accelerated coal phase out, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about examples where this has happened successfully in the past and maybe where we could look to for guidance.
Right, and you actually cannot look to the United States for that. We don't have any state that has successfully really weaned itself off of coal when it had a large coal generation presence to begin with. Washington's getting close to that, and Ontario is kind of the example we look to. And this graphic that we have is from a series that we did called The Future of Coal. One of the things that we were trying to figure out when we did this was we hear that you can't run a grid without coal. Ontario is the example that we look to. And you can see how quickly, I mean, that's a very impressive phase out of coal. But of course, it had its own problems. There were infrastructure challenges, and this isn't the market I cover typically, but there were definitely challenges with raising electricity costs. And I think that it's important that it is an example, not a package. You don't buy Ontario's path to going coal-free. You use it as a way to learn, and particularly what comes out to mind is in the U.S., nuclear really struggles to get a permit. People are somewhat scared of nuclear, but also it's expensive. And then also a lot of that was enabled by hydropower being available. There's a lot of states like West Virginia where more than 95% of the power comes from coal generation. They're not going to be able to switch to hydropower. So everybody's path to getting off of coal, if that's where we're heading, is going to have to look drastically different. But I think when you start seeing Alberta move towards those things and Ontario do those things, everybody's going to learn from each other, and the first movers might end up hitting a few rough patches along the way. But I mean, if that's the path forward, somebody's got to start. Right?
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to pick up on just something that you said in your earlier remarks around non-OECD countries like India and China. So how can we reconcile claims like the ones that I made opening this session around, fossil fuels are being shown the door? How do we reconcile that when new plants are being built in parts of the world?
Right. I mean, the easy answer to that is it's not a straight line down. Right. We're not going to go from 100 to 0 on coal plants. When coal plants make sense economically, and they will in the future, there'll be places where that makes sense in pockets around the globe. I think we're going to see them, and so just because there's a few new plants coming up here and there, it doesn't mean that we're not going to see some of the disruption. And then you also get into there's another kind of line of conversation. Do you try to phase out coal, or do you want to maybe focus on phasing out carbon dioxide emissions? In places like the U.S. and Canada, that probably does mean phasing out coal. In places like China and India, maybe it makes sense to develop carbon capture technology. And do we want to leave those countries up to themselves to do that, or do we want to try to develop it here? The United States is doing it a little bit. So is Canada. None of those have been very successful. They've been very expensive. But I think there's probably a real chance that we have to kind of talk about those sort of things.
Great. Okay. Yeah, certainly CCS comes up a lot in policy discussions in Canada. We'll see how that factors into our potential pan-Canadian plan announcement at the end of the year. So let's turn our discussion now to other policy outcomes that intersect with coal, so not specifically climate. In Canada, we've seen much of the discussion around an accelerated phase-out, focusing on the well-documented climate consequences, but also the health impacts of these facilities. And certainly there were thematic elements of that in both the commitments that were made in Ontario and also here in Alberta. But I wonder, perhaps we're getting to this through the question of CCS as well. Can technology save the coal market? Is this something that, can we mitigate these impacts to the climate and to air quality through a technology fix? Is that possible? And what would it take, in your view, to keep coal online?
Right, and I think we have seen this a little bit before. Several decades ago, coal plants were a lot dirtier than they are now. We had the sulfur, dioxide, all kinds of other things that we were trying to treat, mercury emissions, and the U.S. is just getting to treating that right now. CCS is a completely different kind of thing. We don't really have the solution for that yet. So, I think that technology is something that's probably going to need massive subsidy to survive, and it kind of comes down to a philosophical question of whether you want to do that or not. But I think even some of the large coal miners are starting to say, like, we need policy parity, is what they're kind of the buzzword, that matches what solar and wind have if they're going to develop carbon capture. Because at this point, again, it's cheaper to build a natural gas plant to comply with the Clean Power Plan. So if we're going to develop CCS and decide that CCS is something important to do, then it's going to take some sort of outside investment that's outside of what we currently have right now. We need more research, more development, and everything like that. And again, maybe that doesn't make sense for these countries like the US and Canada, but I do think it's going to be really hard to have a conversation about electrifying China and India without including CCS in some way. But also we have incentives to develop it, because once you have the basics of CCS figured out, then you can begin to look at how you can put those on industrial plants and things like that, and other maybe non-power ways of reducing our greenhouse emissions.
Great. It's an interesting insight, and I think it's particularly interesting in the context of the falling cost of alternatives, right? And so how do you balance the role of government in either subsidizing technology choices or other types of new generation? Wanted to pick up again on a theme that we heard this morning around investor confidence. So the data that you presented in your early slides obviously tells a story that has pretty significant economic pain associated with it. So how should we interpret investor confidence in the coal sector when the industry is very clearly in flux and there are sort of multi-variable factors at play here?
Right. I think if we did a survey and had everybody raise their hand, I don't think anybody's going to say they would invest in a coal plant in this room, and I don't think you would see any hands go up in a room full of bankers either. Coal investors, equity investors, for example, they're not putting any money into coal. They're not buying into coal stock. A great example of this, there's 2 or 3 coal companies. You can look at their balance sheets right now, they look fine. They have plants that are largely captive to power plants that are going to survive the Clean Power Plant. But their stock's dwindling. It's because nobody has any confidence in them. They can demonstrate on paper that they're a viable company, but the market just doesn't want to invest in them. And then now the other problem, the one that's really challenging everybody right now, is that because of all this debt they took on, the bankruptcies that they did, they're going to banks that these have relationships with, and nobody wants to lend them any money. I mean, the market for investing in coal right now is just completely shot in the U.S.
Great. I just want to let the room know that we will have time for questions. So Taylor and I are just going to go through one additional question that I think is really interesting, and then we will open it up to the floor. So if you've got a burning question, just keep it in your back pocket, and we'll come to you shortly. So I want to pick up on the June 2016 North American Leaders Summit. It's been referenced already as it relates to oil and gas methane. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the aggregate clean energy target that was established for North America. So the 3 leaders committed to achieve 50% clean power generation by 2025. So what does this mean for coal on both sides of the border? And what are the opportunities for Canada and the US to tackle coal phase out of both jurisdictions together?
I think that's when a lot of coal companies kind of throw things like this on the pile of things that say that they're not going to have anybody invest in them anymore. But this is, again, it's a really strong commitment and a very powerful message to come from world leaders to say that we're going to take this global initiative on to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide, and right now that's a very bad time for coal. I think it's hard to say exactly specifically where the best collaborations are. Any kind of inter-country generation transmission that you can use is awesome, because then whenever our renewables are going, we can send it to you, vice versa. There's some infrastructure there that can be done. But then I think research is probably going to be the strongest kind of piece of this. Sharing lessons, like whenever we can look to Ontario and see what they did right and what they did wrong. I think that kind of just open dialogue and conversation, especially among both elected officials and also just among universities, researchers, and things like that.
Great. So when we think about that NAL's commitment and sort of more broadly the themes around coal that we've talked about, I wonder if you can give us your insight around the export development opportunities here. Canada, we're an economy that in large ways is focused on exports, and so do you think that clean energy and clean electricity could be part of that story for Canada? What are the opportunities that you see there around exports?
Right, and I think if the U.S. is going to allow compliance with some of our climate goals by taking power from Canada, that's obviously one opportunity. But I think that's kind of just one, really. I mean, whoever figures out some of these new grid technologies, new renewable technologies, those are going to be the companies that are going to profit off of those, and I think that that's going to be a big deal. When someone figures out carbon capture and how to do it cheaply, people around the world are going to want it. whenever, like any kind of thing that can make that more palatable, is going to be a very popular technology. And that when you look at things like energy storage, like to run some of these renewable things, smart grids, things like that we don't quite have figured out yet, technology first is going to really benefit from it.
Thanks, Taylor, for your insights. I wonder if folks just identify yourself. We'd love to take a couple questions from folks in the room.
Okay, there we go. I just wonder if you can comment on where coal plants are anticipated and whether you're confident that the human air quality will be addressed should these new plants materialize, because that's one of the other selling features for switching to natural gas. Thanks.
Right, and I think, thank you for the question. I think China and India is kind of the ones we mostly look at when we're talking about new coal generation, and how much the air quality concerns are going to be addressed is going to be variable from project to project. But will coal plants that are first being built in these countries be as clean as, say, what you see in the United States? Likely, maybe not. There's obviously some issues with natural gas and its own kind of methane leaks that we heard about earlier. But no, I think that if we are going to address those air pollution concerns, that does involve using technology with coal. I think we're going to figure out to make sure that if we are going to have coal-fired power plants built, that they are installed with the kind of newest controls. I mean, if we have the ability here, in the U.S. and here as well, to scrub mercury out of a coal plant stack, very question to ask. And but that also comes down to how much are people going to versus the that air quality concern. And I think what we're seeing a lot now is there wasn't that air quality concern really, and especially as we built, there is that concern because they're actually experiencing them, and I think that's partially why we're seeing a lot of that slow down.
Great. I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. So we've got. Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
The question I have is about bridging the gap. So you showed a graph and you talked a lot about bankrupt coal companies. So how do we go from a situation where we don't end up with wholesale utility collapse and market collapse or price spikes and these things? How do we bring a declining industry and the future which looks different, but we have to get there? So what's happening in the US? Are those bankrupt companies being subsidized to continue to operate in the interim, or it's something else?
Continue to operate. What happened, again, this was largely debt driven. It was not really a function of lower coal prices. I think a lot of these companies would have survived and been able to produce at a lower level and even match just a few years ago down to just under 30%. All those companies could have survived that. They could have shut down mines and then slowly. The problem really there was that they had so much debt that they couldn't afford to bring the production down anymore. So that's kind of a unique case there. Anybody that kind of jumped on the metallurgical coal bandwagon is going to face that problem. But those companies are still producing. Important to note, at least with U.S. bankruptcy law, when a coal mine goes bankrupt, it doesn't have to shut down. The industry themselves are calling them zombie mines because they basically refuse to die. And it's exacerbating the problem with everybody in the industry, Murray Energy. They call it the bankruptcy sewer, is one of the phrases that they use. Basically, prices are too low because there's too big of a supply. Coal companies go bankrupt, they continue to produce coal prices get even lower. I see a way out of it right now. I'm not sure that anybody's really figured it out. There's a handful of companies that might be. They try to jump into metallurgical coal, and the U.S. is really kind of so it was a very risky bet to begin with. But I think from West Virginia, a lot of places that mine and coal that really don't have much else, at least include maybe a conversation about what goes in there. They're kind of a question.
Great. And on that, I know. And certainly, the government of Alberta is taking steps to. We've also heard opportunities to talk about solutions as it relates to working people. Question, and then we'll wrap up.
Mr. Gillespie. Okay. Yeah, we'll fill the room.
Okay.
That's better. And Hillary detailed platform around transitioning off of coal and into other forms of employment and how you might build those kind of bridges for them. Do you have anything else you could add around what would be some of the key elements of transition? Right, and unfortunately not a lot to add to that. It's something that I've been writing about and trying to figure out for a while, and we come across a lot. It's a question that's plaguing a lot of people. One of the challenges, and it's different everywhere you go, Wyoming probably won't have quite the challenges because while it's remote, it's relatively developable land. You go to West Virginia, again where I'm from, you're talking about steep valleys on both sides. There's a stream in the middle, and there might be a small flat patch of land you could probably throw a football across. Those towns, that was an okay geography for mining. It's not really for anything else, and they're too far away really to export anything or to any kind of transport. So figuring out what that means, whether that means working remotely, like through the internet or other kind of jobs. Again, complex question and great question that I think deserves a lot of. I don't think anybody's. So with that, I'll be around. Feel free to grab me.
Great, thank you so much. Just trying to this forum and other from other speakers. The amount of electricity generated worldwide from coal is declining. There's a 50% chance that a new power plant is renewable versus fossil or nuclear. And so I wonder, pulling from that data, these international trends, there are challenges, of course, from just transition. What lessons learned would you bring to Alberta, would you leave Alberta and Canada with, as it sort of seeks to advance a national phase-out?
It's looked at all jurisdictions, again, because it's going to be so different. Find where people have done it before, and even if it's a smaller scale community, because it might even look different, anywhere you go within the region. But I think mainly the lesson's going to be that it's going to change every time. So what was expensive last year might not be expensive in 2 years, and those kind of things, and keep that in mind. Again, one of the things that we heard in the US was that we couldn't go from 50% to 40, then 30% coal without huge price increases. And again, they didn't have. Maybe natural gas will enable that somewhere else. Again, hydro can enable that. Maybe, grid storage will make that easier for renewables to online. But I think the main thing is that everybody has to customize a phase out of coal if that's the route they go. And again, would say that there is a room in the conversation for coal in some jurisdictions like China and India, where maybe carbon capture needs to be a part of the conversation as well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today.